Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. This is a really meaningful uh, moment for me. A couple of years ago, 2019, I read this extraordinary piece in the Washington Post by a woman from Alabama who had lost her vet husband, who had been injured in his second tour in Iraq, eventually lost his leg and became addicted to opioids and died. And I thought it was one of the most extraordinary pieces of writing that I'd really run across. And I reached out to Karie then, said, "Do you have an agent?" She did have an agent then. But I sent it to, I think, everybody I know and just said, "This is," including my editor at Knopf, saying, "This is extraordinary writing." So today, that was 2019, today, 2025, the universe has turned in a very positive way, and this extraordinary book um, has come out. It was published yesterday, and we're just so lucky to have you here to do it, to tell your story, and thank you for joining us, Karie.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
There's so much to talk about in this book. It you know the writing is so powerful, but I just would love for you to kind of give people a sense of the context of it, of your late husband's story growing up as kids in Alabama, and what was the start of all this.
Um, so for me, actually, I grew up, my dad was in the Army. He was in for 10 years. The first 6 years of my life, he was gone for 15 months at a time. So I watched my mother raise three children
Right.
mostly on her own, and I think after seeing that, I decided like I'm not going to marry anyone in the military. That's not for me. Um, but then, of course, my dad got out of the military. We moved to Alabama, and I met a boy from Foley, Alabama. And at the time, he didn't have plans of joining the military. And we became close. Our first kiss was when we were 13. And fast forward, he comes from a family that doesn't have a lot of money. So when he, was 17, 18 and trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do with my life? Even though we were at war, it made sense to him to join the military to get insurance and housing and get, a job on his resume and hopefully also get the GI Bill and go to school. So he joined, and then MySpace was a thing back then, and we found each other on MySpace, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's this person that I already had feelings for, and I was a flight attendant, and we were only a 30-minute flight apart. So I started to go see him, and we fell in love, and he deployed a second time, and 3 weeks later he was hit by an IED, and then that's how everything started.
And you were married just before his first deployment?
Yes, we were married January 11th of 2006, and he was deployed March 10th of 2006, and then wounded April 1st.
And how long was it from that until he finally passed?
It was almost exactly 4 years. He passed away April 20th, 2010. It was the same day as the Gulf oil spill, actually.
Huh, wow. I just there's so many reasons to read this book, but one is just you could just end right there. The story of how, and then you write about this beautifully. There it is, a live day, which I love this cover.
I do too. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
I think it's just
I got lucky.
it's super powerfully done. Um, it, there's a story that you write about how there's sort of this military substructure out there that is aimed at sucking up kids like you and your husband. That
Mhm.
kids who don't have a lot of options, who most don't come from wealthy backgrounds. There's a phrase that you quote your late husband saying that something to the effect of that the breadcrumbs, he followed the breadcrumbs that he could find, and that led him to the Marines.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the story of how you write about how military spouses really become an unpaid labor source for the military, which, I thought that was just so powerful. Can you just talk about, so you get this call that he's been badly wounded in an IED, and your role, everything in your life then changes, right? You then become a caregiver,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he ended up at Walter Reed.
We started at Bethesda Naval Hospital, but it ended up now Bethesda Naval Hospital is the new Walter Reed. They merged.
Right.
Okay. But back then, Bethesda Naval Hospital was in Bethesda, Maryland, and then Walter Reed was in DC. So we were at both at different times, but started at Bethesda.
And how much time were you able to spend with him then? I mean, did you just have to relocate there? How did all this work?
I had to relocate. The night I got the call, I got very little information. They said that he was being flown. They had surgery already on his leg, and he was being flown in from Germany to Bethesda.
Right.
That he would be there in the next 24 hours, and to just get there. And I was like, how much clothes do I pack? Do I need? At that point, too, I had just moved to Jacksonville, North Carolina, where Camp Lejeune is, because we had just gotten married. And I was looking for jobs, and I was applying for college and like trying to establish myself there. And then suddenly I was like, okay, I'm going to DC. But my friend who I was living with at the time, the wife of his best friend in the Marine Corps, drove me to Bethesda, and we had no idea what to expect. So when I got there, and started filling out paperwork and listening to the Marine liaison talk about very casually, like the next few months in the hospital, I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to be like here for at least months. So I need to like start thinking about what that looks like. Cause at that point too, I didn't have a car there. So, but anyway, they put you up in a hotel. It was the Navy Lodge back then.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a little kitchenette with a double burner, and it was kind of just like your typical outdated, scratchy comforter hotel. And it was within walking distance to the hospital. So, my routine ended up, I would wake up, stop by the Burger King, get breakfast, walk over to the hospital, spend the day with him, or wait in a waiting room for him because he was in and out of a lot of surgeries. And over time, learning from the nurses how to care for his wounds.
And his wound was from an IED, and it was a serious leg wound, right?
Yes.
And originally the expectation was to be able to save the leg.
Yes. When we go to war, one of the things that comes out of it is, doctors get to like practice a lot on these like new types of wounds. Mm-hmm. Like the wound that he had, if say he got it in Vietnam, he wouldn't have come back with a leg. But because we had advanced, whatever, they were able to try to keep it, but they were explicit, like, he's going to be a guinea pig. We're not 100% sure. Like they had to cut entire muscle, latissimus muscle from his back and sew it to his calf because there was no soft tissue there anymore. And they really just like rebuilt the tiny veins and like did skin grafts. And so it was not a pretty leg, but he was adamant that he wanted to keep it. I think he was really, really, really afraid of being, disabled or like not being able to do things that he loved doing. He was a football player and
Right.
He liked driving a stick shift, and like he was afraid that if he didn't have his leg, he wouldn't be able to do that. But yeah.
And then how long until they came to the conclusion that they needed to amputate it?
It was about 2 years, which is crazy to think about now. Time was going by really fast back
Yeah.
then, just surgery after surgery, and a couple months turned into a year, turned into 2 years. But at that point, they had actually sent us back to Camp Lejeune, and that's when I was really I was working outside of the home, but I was also his caregiver. Like every 4 hours, I had to change a bag of antibiotics for him, and I was still wrapping wounds, and a nurse would visit every other week, and I would help her with the PICC line to like clean it up. The PICC line is a line that goes straight to his heart for the medications. But yeah, we were there for I don't know, 6 months or so. And he would have to fly to Bethesda once a month for checkups. And he was on one of his checkups, and I got a call, and he was just devastated. And he was like, I have a bone infection. They have to amputate by tomorrow so that I don't lose my knee. And yeah, that was even after he was wounded, he was very sort of like optimistic and like cracking jokes and like just trying to stay positive. But that was like the first time that I really heard, it just felt like his spirit broke a little bit. It was really heartbreaking.
And from the very beginning, they had him on various opioids, right?
Yes, from the very beginning.
Yeah. Until the very end, right?
Until the very end, yes.
And I mean, one of the things you write about, and I want to get into this sort of infrastructure, the good and the bad of what you saw in the VA system. There's beautiful passages in this book and this article that you wrote for the Post about how they have a system to treat wounds, but are much less focused or qualified, successful at treating internally, mentally, the psychological.
Right.
I have to say that kind of surprised me because we read so much about, PTSD, and I would have thought that there would have been a larger infrastructure, more focus on this. I mean, it wasn't like opioids. This wasn't. Yeah, by the time this was happening, opioids were a national scandal, and
it was peaking, the scandal, which I was young, right? 21, 20, 21, 22. I didn't realize that was happening, partly because I was just so preoccupied with what was in front of me. But yes, it was a national, like looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, all this was happening at like the peak of the opioid crisis, at least back then, before fentanyl became an issue. But I will say, like, since then, it did get better. It wasn't perfect, but the VA, like a lot of people died. There were a lot of veterans that were dying from opioid overdose. There's another one of his friends in the book died before he did.
Right.
He was living in the barracks, and he was also wounded. He was being seen at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He was also struggling similarly, and he was found in his barracks room. So it was pretty common. And I think once it started to make national news and there were more headlines, the military was like, we got to do something about this. So they did start to crack down on it, and it did start to get a little better. Did they solve the problem? No. But they seemed to be more aware of it. Because, if you've read the book, you know that part of the issue that I was having is I was seeing these symptoms, like experiencing them in real time, and then talking to a doctor or talking to doctors, and they were just like, no, it's fine. And just kind of blowing it off. That changed. Like they started taking it more seriously and started to actually like.
So let me just ask you a question. Why do you think that was happening? Was it because they just didn't, they had so much to do, they didn't want to deal with this part of it? Was it lack of knowledge, or was it just lack of the meaning of it?
It's impossible for me to know for sure, right? And I don't know
Can't get
how
in
much
their
of it was
heads.
like that specific doctor versus like
Right.
this larger system that we were in. I think that if I had to guess, a lot of things were at play. One of them is just that was closer to the beginning of the war for one, and I think it was still things were sort of chaotic.
Right.
Even nonprofits weren't established. Like, I remember, Wounded Warrior Project is huge, right? I remember when it was just a guy with a backpack, and he would, like, come through and give us backpacks with pencils and, like, other things. Like, that was the beginning of Wounded Warrior Project, and then it turned into this huge thing eventually. But, like, we were there kind of at the beginning when they were trying to get their footing, I think. So that was part of it. But the other part, if I'm being honest, I think this is going to be a little dark for me to say, but I think the military just sort of, they know that people are going to die. And,
Mm.
if you're looking at the military like a business, they're thinking about how much does it cost to take care of someone versus how much does it cost to, like, pay their widow until they get remarried, um, or whatever. And I think that from my experience, what I've witnessed is that a lot of times it takes people complaining before the military acts
Yeah.
versus
Proactively seeing
yes,
this and going after it.
yes, like, they're going to kind of get away with whatever they can, as far as that's concerned, because it's expensive. All of this is expensive. Like, it's money for research. It's money to hire different doctors to handle these different things. It takes a lot of time. So if they don't have to put the energy into that, they're not probably just not going to. But you can't ignore a leg that's been blown off. Like, you have to deal with that. So that part they had covered. But all of the things that people couldn't see with their eyes, it took them a little bit to start focusing on that. And I think a lot of that did have to do with, like, it was in the headline, like, people were complaining about it. People started realizing it was a problem.
Yeah, I felt, you know, one of the most extraordinary things about that Washington Post piece was how you wrote about his prosthetic leg and how it became this, sort of symbol or talisman.
It's
Or
in my car right now. Like, it's with me.
I that, that is so extraordinary. And I want to talk about these budget cuts and how you see what's happening now is going to affect the veterans, and which means it'll affect the country. But first, I was so after he passed, you then were able to get benefits that enabled you to go to college, right?
Yes.
Um, and so you had a GED,
Mhm.
right? You're a high school dropout,
Mhm.
and then you went to South Alabama. Is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
in Mobile.
a place I know well because grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
Um,
Mobile's where I consider my home.
yeah, yeah. And let's talk about that. You were very fortunate. You feel that you were able to find a mentor there. To
Yes.
so tell us about that. What was that?
My mentor,
Yeah, and just what was that like to walk into a room and to have someone tell you that you have talent?
it was at first I didn't trust it. I was
Sure.
like, maybe she says this to all the students.
Right.
But no, it didn't matter. I think that, and at this point, I've also taught at a university because I ended up going to get my MFA. But I always remembered how impactful it was to just have a teacher take the time to sit with me alone and tell me that she believed in me, that she thought I could do anything I wanted, really. Especially when you come from a background, even if you're not in there's a scale of like poverty or like being
Mhm.
poor or whatever. And my family wasn't like the poorest people on the planet, but we didn't have I didn't have the luxury of dreaming about whatever I wanted to be when I grew up. It was more like, okay, how can I get from living with my parents to affording rent to, and like very practical. And there were times I was like, well, I've got to get married. I've got to get married because you're going to have 2 incomes. And like, that's kind of where my head was at. But this was the first time where I was like, I had all the resources I needed to be whatever I wanted and do whatever I wanted without constantly worrying. Um, and it was huge. And yeah, when I went on to the MFA program, which is ultimately where that led, because that's what she was trying to like convince me to do, is apply to MFA programs. I got to teach. And so it was cool to think about how I could affect students from there. I ended up volunteering with an alternative high school. It was kids that otherwise would have dropped
And this
out.
is this is at where were you getting your MFA? Where was
Um, Oregon State
the Oregon
University.
State? Yeah.
It was in Corvallis, and Corvallis has this really cool program that's
A little different than Dothan.
a little bit.
Hey,
I miss it. I miss Corvallis. But yeah, they had this really cool program that my town didn't have. Foley, Alabama, we didn't have anything like this, but it's meant for kids that just aren't doing well in a regular public school system. And they set it up similar to like a college situation. So like, here are your classes. You can leave in between your classes. You can go to a job in between your classes, whatever you need to do.
right.
And still work toward getting a high school diploma. But anyway, I started volunteering there because I was like, all of these kids, like I saw myself in them. And I was teaching creative writing classes, and I don't know. I just, at that point, I knew how important it was to have someone when you're that age look at you and say, you are talented. You could totally do this. Like it's life-changing, really.
Yeah, and the impact that you will have on these students that led you this. So, in and this stuff fascinates me. I'll shut up about. We'll get into talking about more of the politics. But in the journey to opening up this box of books,
Yeah.
which I've now written 9 books. It's just such a big moment, and there's certain moments. First, seeing a galley, or and then seeing actually working with an editor. But the ultimate moment is like someone from this warehouse sends you like books.
Mhm.
And when did you first know that your book was going to be published? When was it first sold?
It was sold in February 2020.
Hmm.
So right before COVID.
And how much of it had you written at that point?
A few chapters. And then I also, like, one of the things that I do before I start like really sewing together a narrative is when I'm writing nonfiction, I'll think about memory and then how I can turn it into scenes. So I had like this stack of like memories that I had turned
Hmm.
into scenes that weren't really
Right.
telling any sort of story. But yeah, it started there, and then a couple of chapters that I had used to sell the book with a book proposal.
And when did you turn the completed manuscript?
It was a long timeline because COVID, I had a baby in between, and then there was COVID. I took 2 years off.
Mhm.
So for many reasons, and like, thank you to my editor for being so flexible because that was a tough
COVID
time.
was a terrible time to bring a book out anyway.
It just, you would have thought though that I'm like sitting there by myself and like I have all this time to write, but it was more like, is the world ending? And also like I'm having a baby. I'd never had a baby before. A lot was going on. So my editor gave me a couple years off. But I turned it in not last fall, but the fall before that, I think.
Mhm.
So 2023 is
That,
that?
which that's that long of a time between submission and publication is toward the unusual scale.
It is
A
unusual.
year is not unusual, which I think people don't. No one outside of people actually write books get this. You know,
Right.
you'll tell friends, "Well, I turned in my book." They'll go, "Great, can we get it?" Like in a couple. I think it's like a magazine
I
article. Or,
still, yeah.
yeah,
People
it's
are
like
so confused. They're like, "Didn't you get a book deal? Are you sure you're writing a book?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm
and
doing it.
it's
It'll be here."
which I think goes to one of the most difficult things I think as a writer is to believe in yourself.
Yes.
And I don't know if there's ever been a human who wrote a book who at some point in it wasn't convinced it was the worst book that was ever been written.
It's so true.
You know, I mean, Moby Dick, Herman Melville tried to burn Moby Dick. His wife saved it from the fireplace, you know, and it's really not that bad of a book. So I think that sense of just continuing and knowing that you're going to write bad stuff, but
Right.
then you will write good stuff, and
Right.
that's part of the process,
It
and the
is.
right stuff. And uh, because like I'm a guy from Mississippi and I play football. I always think listen to what they tell like quarterbacks. You're going to throw interceptions. You're going to do this. Just like play the next play.
Hmm.
And I think that waking up every morning and facing that blank screen and having faith in yourself that okay, today will be better than it was. I just think that it's why so many people give up on books.
Hmm.
You know,
So much of it is persistence. Like
yeah,
talent is obviously one part of it, and like knowing how to write a scene or whatever. But I almost feel like more of it is being persistent
I
and just
absolutely agree with that.
um because that no matter how much talent you have, no matter how great your story is, if you are not at some point going to sit down and put it down on the page and then be willing to edit it over and over again, it's not going to exist. So, and I think that is where a lot of people end up falling off. Like they have a great idea, they just
You're
won't
right.
end up putting the time into it.
And I think the whole role of books in our lives it was constantly changing. I mean,
Mhm.
but it's in the last 10 years with social media, particularly, it's changed so much. The structure of bookstores, um,
The types of books people love.
the type of books people are reading.
Mhm.
I love this moment where you go to one of these things that we've now sort of phenomenon of these pop-up little book stands that are these free books, free libraries, I guess you would call them.
Mhm.
People are putting, I'm in California at the moment, and I discovered one on a bike ride yesterday um, that someone had just sat there in right by the road where it's just like a horse pasture,
Mhm.
um, and all these books. Uh, and you wrote this Instagram that you always wanted to be able to put your own book there. That
Yeah,
must have been an incredible moment.
it was. And I was with my daughter at a park that we have been going to for years together. So yeah, she was like walking toward the playground and I got to sign my book and put it in this little free library that I've seen for years. In this community that I've been living in. Like, yeah, it was a really cool moment for sure.
Next moment will come. You're going to be on a plane and you're going to see someone reading the book. Then
That
you're going to have this
would
moment.
be neat.
Then you're going to have this moment like, should I tell them this?
Can
I
I
read,
sign?
is it Colin Whitehead, the guy who writes so many great books for Underground Railway. And anyway,
Mhm.
I read this account where after he published his first book, he had that experience. He saw someone in an airport who was carrying it, and he was going to go up and introduce himself. But then he realized that he was wearing the same shirt as he had in his author's photo, and that they would only think that he had one shirt. And he couldn't do it. I thought it was like it was such a writer's moment.
That's
Um,
hilarious.
but let's talk about what you're seeing now with these cuts and how it's going to sort of affect people in real lives. I mean, if you were and you may very well, this may very well happen to you, called to testify in front of Congress to give your experience and how it meant. How do you see this? Because how you see it and how the rest of us, most of us see it is just similar in some ways, but different in the understanding of what it means.
I mean, when I think about these cuts, it reminds me, obviously, I'm thinking about all of the resources my husband needed. Like, he didn't have to die. I think if he had certain resources, he'd still be alive right now. And a lot of those things that he needed, they ended up improving on over the last 15 or so years. Like, I think stories like his, making headlines, whatever, that led to them being more proactive. Lives were being saved. But when they're talking about cutting things from the VA, I'm like, you're just now getting to a place where like it's getting better. And to think that they would go back to where we were before, it just doesn't make sense to me. It is, I mean, it's heartbreaking. Like, this will kill people. People will die because of this. And then I also think about all of these young caregivers that, like, I was saying earlier about there's a care gap in the military. And you've got these spouses that are filling that gap with mostly free labor, but although that's another thing that they improved on, they started paying caregivers for their time. But that's the kind of program that I feel like would be on the chopping block, right? But what ends up happening is you've got these young families where the wife is having to do all this labor for free. So it's difficult to get a job outside of the home. And then, I mean, it creates so many problems for the entire family. So yeah, when I hear about, possibly 80,000 jobs being cut, or I see how many veterans are losing their jobs just because of federal employees in general being cut, it's devastating. I think about the homeless population and how many of them are veterans and how yeah.
And cutting back on the suicide hotline.
Yes. Like, why?
Why?
Why? I don't understand it. People will die because of this.
And it's really an unfair question. I don't think any of us know, but you're surrounded by a lot of Trump voters. And if I go home to Mississippi, I'm surrounded by a lot of Trump voters. I mean, I used to help elect Republicans, right? God help me. But do you ever talk to them about this?
I try. Recently, there hasn't been a lot. Like, people in Dothan, it seems like either you're MAGA or you try to stay out of politics. Like, it's just very quiet, or MAGA.
Yep.
I've been frustrated though, because I'm seeing what I'm seeing in the news scares me. I have a daughter. I also have, my husband died for this country. Like, it's very important to me that we preserve the Constitution and preserve everything that this country was built on. So I was like, I'm going to start trying to get protests going in my area and try to get some like community together to like help with everything from like voter turnout to community cleanups to whatever, to just like get people mobilized a little bit more and talking so that we can have those conversations. Because I think part of it is, especially in communities like this, being visible, letting people know that you're there. Because sometimes those people will come up and start asking you questions like, well, why do you believe that? This is what I believe. So I'm trying at this point to just find the other people who think like I do and they're seeing what I'm seeing, get them together, make it more visible so that we are available to have those conversations with other people. And sometimes they come in hot and angry, but part of it for us too, or at least for me, is I feel like it's really important right now to be building bridges anywhere possible. Sometimes it's impossible, unfortunately. But there are some people that, yeah, they're like, maybe they have someone in their family who's a veteran who lost their job, and suddenly they're like, this isn't what I voted for. And that's an in to have a conversation.
And
So
you have it's very difficult to dismiss you as some like woke East Coast, West Coast,
and they do, man. I've gotten some backlash. There's
Yeah.
everything from like, I'm being paid and I'm not from here.
Right,
And
your check from George Soros, right?
I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm paying money to do this out of my own pocket, but okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot about how the experience must have been because, I'm of an age where like a lot of guys I went to high school with went to Vietnam, and what it was like for them to come back. And I think we've gotten to a better place in the country. The military is much better from what, everything you read. They're all voluntary, army, certainly flawed, all these, and there seems to be steps backwards that are only going to create more dysfunction, more tension, more disrespect for people that all they want to do is give for their country. But it seemed, we're reaching a point in society where there was more of a respect for this. But I mean, it's still, I just think that to have someone like Pete Hegseth, how can this guy, you take this drunk off of Fox News and put him in, it's just so unimaginable to me. So
It feels really disrespectful.
it's
Like, it's
disrespectful is the perfect
a
word.
joke. It's not
You don't take this seriously.
seriously, right? I mean,
He's the
the things that he's doing are putting people's lives at risk.
Yeah.
And yeah, it doesn't seem to be being taken seriously. So yeah, very disrespectful.
Well, look, I could talk to you all day, but I really think one of the things I hope that this book does, and I hope this book sells hundreds of thousands of copies.
I do too.
Yeah, I mean, it is it's just so rare to find a book that works on so many levels.
Thank you for
And,
saying that.
ultimately, writing is about writing sentences.
Mhm.
And this book has great sentences in it. And I hope that it'll, as you go around talking about it, and I hope in 5 weeks you call your editor and say, I can't give one more interview because you've given so many, that it'll give people sort of a door into this world of what it's like. Because when you just read these numbers, like we're going to have these cuts and this cut, what does it mean to people? How does it impact people's lives?
Right.
In a positive sense too, because it had not been for the benefits, you never would have been able to have a chance to go to college. You never would have been able to meet this mentor. It's not all negative. And I just hope there has been, you read about this a lot, and there's another conversation I'd like to have with you about, in a society where we don't have national service, where we have a small percentage of the people who are serving in the military, that there invariably gets this disconnect of this. And you have, the Great War on Terror, 20 plus years. And it's almost like two different universes that coexist, but rarely understand each other.
And I didn't know that until fairly recently. I thought everyone had a similar experience, like recruiters in your high school and growing up near a military base and having family who'd served, because my grandfather served in the Navy. My father served in the Army. Like, it's always been a part of my life. But I realized there's a huge divide in our country between those who serve and those who really don't know anything about the military. Like, it really just doesn't affect their lives at all. Even though they live in this country, like if you're a citizen in America, like you're benefiting from war and everything that the military is doing, whether you acknowledge it or not.
And that targeting that you write about of a socioeconomic class.
Mhm.
I mean, it's rare that you see a Whole Foods, a military recruiting office, and an Apple store, like all three next to each other.
Right,
You'll find them in strip malls. You're going
right.
to find it in places where, you walk out and you can walk to a place where you can get a loan.
Mhm.
And that they're there for a reason. I mean,
Yes,
that's where they think they studied this, the greatest odds of meeting their quotas, of,
yes.
of getting these people in.
They know that the benefits or whatever that the military offers, like, that's
Mhm.
a huge part of it. If you don't need health insurance or a place to live or college,
If your
like,
parents is, saying, look, I'll pay for you to go to, some school that costs $40,000 a
why
year.
not go there?
Yeah.
That's easy, that makes sense. They know that is way
Mhm.
less likely that they'd be able to recruit those people, but
Yeah.
also there's a much higher percentage of recruiting kids who have, family members who have served as well, so they tend to recruit around, like, military bases too. But yeah, it's all calculated. They know what they're doing
Yeah.
for
Well,
sure.
listen, thank you so much for doing this. What I have to end on two questions. When are you doing your first signing? Have you done a signing yet?
No.
And
I signed a book last night for my friend, but that's
at
it.
the moment,
I am doing one though on Saturday in
and
Mobile.
where's that going to be?
It'll be in Mobile at the Haunted Bookshop downtown.
Yeah.
And then I have another one in Washington, D.C. on the 14th
And
at,
is that where is that?
I forgot what it's called.
Those in politics?
No, it starts with S. I can't believe I'm forgetting.
That's okay.
I'll let you know
It,
though.
I think there still are these independent bookstores out there, and it's just so important we support them. And there's there's a readers community out there, and I've always found signings very difficult. Um, I don't know. And like everybody, I have very funny stories or most people. I don't not like everybody. I don't think Stephen King runs into this, but you're signing and like 10 people show up. And it's
Yeah.
like when you're there, it's like, that's what I do. I did a signing, there is in Birmingham, this store, you should do a signing at this place called Alabama Booksmith. I don't know if you're familiar with this bookstore,
Mm-mm.
but
I have friends in Birmingham
he only sells signed books.
though. Okay.
That's all. Wonderful guy. He decided like 15 years ago, that's what he was going to do. So his inventory plummeted, but his sales skyrocketed. And
That's smart.
people buy these books. And I wrote a book about going to, when my dad turned 95, going to all the Ole Miss football games with him that season. And I wrote a book about it called The Last Season. And I did a signing there. And I was with this former University of Alabama football star who also played for Miami, who was from Alabama. And I would say for every 100 person that was there to see my book, there was 100 people for him. It was this local guy, And finally, I was sitting there, his dad kind of like felt sorry. His dad came because he was like hometown. I felt sorry for him. It was like, trying to recruit people. Like, you should buy this book too. It was very funny.
Oh,
But anyway,
that's sweet.
everybody has stories like that. But
I mhm.
and the next question I just have to leave it with: are you working on a new book?
Not actively. I
Mhm.
actually I have some thoughts about, what I would like to write, but honestly, right now, I worked ever since my husband died, I have put everything into this.
Yeah.
Um, it was
Well,
kind of an obsession. And before that, I was a caregiver, and before that, I was a high school dropout, a runaway, and all. So I'm gifting myself
no,
a
you should
period of rest.
enjoy this experience.
Yes.
You're an author now, and
Yeah, and I'm just gonna be a mom for a minute and an author and just take a breath for a
yeah.
second and try to enjoy this moment that I've worked really hard for, and then we'll see what happens next.
Well, I'm so glad this did happen, and that you were able to get to this point. And it's difficult to imagine what it took, the sort of perseverance and the ability to believe in yourself. So thank you so much.
You.
I know in 10 years, we'll be able to sit here and we'll talk about other books you've written.
I
Because
hope so. That'd be cool.
talent like yours does not sit quietly. It
Thank
will
you.
rest, but it will not allow you not to write. So thanks very much. Sam, you want to put up the book as copy? Yeah. Alive Today, Karie Fugett. Just an amazing piece. And you should go and Google her piece that she wrote for the Washington Post. It came out in 2019, Love and War. I just, and so if you just look at his pulse for a minute, there is your husband's prosthetic leg.
Mm-hmm.
The power of this is just amazing. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining Lincoln Square. We're in this media crisis. It's something that affects everything, like how we sell books now, everything. And no one's going to save us. So we're really trying to build a community here at Lincoln Square. We're talking about politics, but we need to talk about culture. And the inner politics is always downstream of culture. Mm-hmm. And to keep these values alive, and a community of readers and writers and people reading is just essential to that, because we've never had an administration at war with education the way this administration is.
Yeah.
They've tragically decided that higher education is a gateway drug to socialism, mm-hmm. which, is insane. I think about that every time I go to the Ole Miss Alabama game. Like, really? A lot of socialists here, huh? But it has an effect to downplay education. They're at war with Harvard because Trump sees Harvard as a place that never would have accepted him, and he's angry about it. So we have to value all this, and we're doing it here, and you can help by subscribing to Lincoln Square, and just following us and joining us, and buy this damn book. It is so good. And thank you, Karie.
Thank you so much.